What ho viewers, and welcome back to Headphones UK Reviews, where we once again take a look at classic British cartoons, and today we've got one of the classic and greatest cartoons of them all, with one of the greatest cartoon characters to boot. He's amazing, he's fantastic, but who exactly is he? Yes, DangerMouse, one of those shows that your dad always said is way better than all this Pokemon and SpongeBob nonsense you watch today, but does it still hold up? Well, let's take a look, shall we? DangerMouse premiered in 1981 on the child-based subsidiary of ITV, that being CITV. Where do they come up with these extremely complicated names, I ask you? The show was created by British animation legend Brian Cosgrove and his studio Cosgrove Hall, who in their long and illustrious career produced such classics as Noddy, Jamie and the Magic Torch, Sooty, Little Robots, and probably their greatest achievement being the 1989 animated version of the BFG, which I still regard as a highly underrated Roald Dahl film, by the way. I mean, come on, what movie with manslaughtering, kidnapping and cannibalism isn't an instant family classic? They also brought us one of the better bits of Doctor Who to come out of the wilderness years, the animated feature Scream of the Shulker, in where Richard E. Grant played the Doctor. I don't want to be here! For his second time. And technically not his last either. And Derek Jacobi played the Master.
We really should change that message.
And again, not for the last time. They also brought us the somewhat odd but highly entertaining Infinite Quest, and handled the animated reconstruction of the lost Doctor Who episode The Invasion, starring Patrick Troughton. And quite frankly, all this exposition is enough to make anyone feel giddy. Sadly, Cosgrove Hall went defunct in 2009 and was merged with CITV completely, but left behind a great legacy of shows and movies, and of all of them, DangerMouse is probably the best known and arguably the most beloved. Though considering that Whovians and Dahl fans have to thank for some of the stuff they made, it's hard to think that that is the most beloved thing that they did, especially when two of the things that you made are watched by some of the most enthralled fan bases in the world. But now, let's talk about the greatest secret agent in the world. Screw you, James Bond, and screw you, Big Boss. This little guy can outdo both of you. I mean, what good is a cyborg arm if another agent can just crawl inside and then chew the wires loose, eh? Anyways, onto the show. The episodes of the series would generally start out like most action films spoofed of the mid-2000s, with an exaggerated and extremely self-aware narrator making fun of the situation they're witnessing, rather than just simply talking about it like they should do.
It is here the DangerMouse, stout-hearted, etc., etc., and Penfold, his hamster-hearted chicken assistant. Hey?
What? Regardless, we'd normally go over to DM and his chicken-hearted hamster sidekick Penfold, voiced by occasional carry-oner and one half of Terry and June, Terry Scott, and the rodent 007 himself, voiced by the great David Jason, who also provides the voice of the narrator, though was primarily known as Del Boy from Only Fools and Horses.
What a plonker!
And would later portray the title character in the DangerMouse spin-off show, Duckula, though we'll get to him later. Hell, he even voiced the testicle-chinned one himself in the BFG.
What has us got here?
Quite frankly, the fact that Jason is the voice of DangerMouse himself is awesome anyway, though we still do have 10 minutes left, so we might as well see what they also give us. Anyway, Penfold and DM are normally contacted by Cornel'K, their boss who issues them with a mission, voiced by extra extraordinaire Edward Kelsey, the guy who played pretty much every background role in almost anything up until 2005, until Jim Broadbent eventually replaced him in that pedestal. Just imagine it though, if he'd have lived just a little bit longer, he would have been the villain in Hot Fuzz. Anyway, the Colonel will issue the two with a mission, or in some cases, something to throw both DangerMouse and the audience off guard, that being trying to line up his lips with his dialogue.
Nothing, listen, DM. Baron Greenback's surrendered.
Though, sadly, that seems to be an affliction shared with almost all the characters in the series.
DangerMouse here, sir. What is it, Colonel? Some terrible world-shattering disaster for us to solve?
I'll get to that later. But the rodent rogue's greatest foes lie in the dreaded Baron Greenback, once again voiced by Kelsey doing a Godfather impression.
Very good, Colonel. That was word perfect.
You could say, he's making you a performance you can't refuse. And his assistant, greater Italian stereotype. Oh no, I'm sorry, I meant Stiletto Mafiosa.
Barone, money, I think we have plenty to elephant.
Voiced by Brian Truman, sounding like he's trying to do the most exaggerated Al Pacino impression to go alongside Kelsey's Marlon Brando impression.
Say, Barone.
What do you think of the accent, Mr. Montana?
Fuck them all! I buried those cockroaches!
Whoa, steady on, I wouldn't quite go that far. Ironically, during the American release on Nickelodeon, the accent was actually changed to a Cockney one to not offend actual Italian Americans. Good move on that one. I mean, it's not like there are any other kind of Italian American stereotypes that are highly engrossed and beloved in American media. None whatsoever. The show would normally involve either the heroes of our story trying to foil one of the villain's plans, or getting roped into the middle of one of their plans without even realising it, and figuring out how to get out of it as they go along. Oh, I'm sorry, I was just going over my Doctor Who notes again. What were we talking about? The show often relied on meta-humour, and ones that involve every kind of resource that the creators had at their disposal. The animation, the voice acting, the framing, the storytelling devices, even the show's format of a TV show.
Duckula meets Frankenstoke. Or Frankenstoke meets Duckula. Or Frankenstoke and Duckula meet DangerMouse and Penfold. Or Penfold and Duckula meet Frankenstoke.
And there's a healthy amount of surrealist humour in there, such as Frankenstein running on a C Duracell battery, or Duckula transforming into a cricket bat. Get it? He turned into a bat? Get it? Though I guess the creators of the show thought that the audience at the time didn't, since they felt the need to hammer the point home with some obvious puns, which the show is no stranger to of course.
Well bowled! Yes, certainly seemed to have him stumped.
Who's gonna bail him out?
Yes, all right, Penfold.
He certainly made a slip this time.
Yeah, Penfold.
It's all over.
Shush.
Oh, wink.
I would complain, but those are gold compared to my puns. Hell, that joke actually becomes a major plot point in this episode.
Yes, well, don't stand there being silly. Just
A block of bats.
Seriously, just watch the episode Duckula meets Frankenstoke. You'll never watch a Universal horror film the same way again.
Then I, Dr. Frankenstoke. Frankenstoke. It's Dr. Frankenstoke.
yes, or his double.
But by far, the best part of the show's humour came from David Jason's fantastic deadpan delivery.
Yes, here we are. Oh, so sorry, didn't know it was engaged.
His delivery is not only hilarious, but it actually allows the character of DangerMouse to live up to his name, fearless in the face of any threat that comes into his view. Though admittedly the story of Bold the Fox Cub has taught us that that can get you into trouble as much as it can get you out of it, and I really don't want to see a scene where DangerMouse gets his kneecap shot out or one of his eyes slashed. Oh wait, sorry, I forgot about the eye patch. He probably already has. Though if you fight like a Tasmanian devil on cocaine, you're gonna lose something every once in a while. Just count yourself lucky that it's just your eye. Despite how great this show is in standing the test of time, the animation does hold up quite well, though some of it can be a bit choppy at times, such as this scene in Trouble with Ghosts where Frankenstein's monster walks like he's the icon on the loading screen of a Wii game, yet DM and Penfold walk very smoothly with clear amounts of frames used for the walk cycle, and it creates a bit of a distracting juxtaposition. However, as I said earlier, the greatest exemplification of how this show lacks in the animation department is the characters trying to match up their lips with the dialogue that they're given. Seriously, I've seen badly dubbed anime with better lip syncing than this, and I'm sure that it was probably done for a particular reason, but just for the fact that this show has this makes it painfully dated, since sadly a voice that doesn't match up with the animation is a trait shared by many older cartoons. This comes down to a very common corner cutting technique, which is still somewhat used in animation today, in where you use the same animation models, or sometimes even the same frames of animation, in different scenes within the same episode, or sometimes within multiple episodes at the same time. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's been a mainstay in all forms of animation all over the world for decades, but this show, while not using it massively, does clearly cut corners in some areas. In fact, if you took a shot of whiskey for every time a piece of animation was reused in the same episode, by the end of only one you'd be lying on a pile of half-empty whiskey bottles mumbling that you'd swear Baron Greenback looks like your mate's mum, and people are avoiding you from obsessively trying to pull a piece of paper out your TV screen. Some might say that's an oddly specific example. I say don't mix alcohol and cartoons. How do you think I started doing this show in the first place? Besides that, the animation does generally hold up, especially if you take into account the time it was made in. I mean, yes, naturally the colours are quite faded, they loop backgrounds like a Flintstones wallpaper roll, and there are some odd mistakes now and again. What, you really can't see that skeleton behind Penfold, DM? But the character's movement and placement within the shot is generally quite well done, and it's clear that despite the odd cheat now and again, they did put a lot of effort into the animation, and it did get better as the series went on. Even the lip syncing was nearly perfect by then. That is, when they again weren't cheating by covering up some of the characters' mouths. Seriously, things got so underhanded I'm surprised it didn't break out the cartoon genie or the animation replay in some cases. Though, admittedly, the cheaper quality of the animation does actually help add to the charm of this show, particularly in the spookier episodes when the dark, dank colours create this really creepy, foreboding mood to the whole thing. Though the music also does help in that regard too. The music for the series is top notch, and while again simple, the melody that they made for the theme song is awesome enough to be repeated within the show itself as the general background theme during action scenes.
DangerMouse and Penfold set off for Transylvania, traditional home of vampires and werewolves and dark things that go bump in the night.
And the other background music generally shines too.
Oh, good grief!
Though there are some times when it feels like they just took an unprecedented and random tune and just threw it into the episode without any regard of what it would sound like in the grand scheme of things. Pfft, how lazy can you get, right? Anyway, I need to look up the next copyrighted tune for the next action scene in a future episode. Naturally, the show was quite a mainstay for CITV throughout the 80s and 90s, getting multiple series, reruns, and eventually 2 spin-offs. The first, of course, being the equally beloved Count Duckula, in where a character who was an occasional reoccurring villain in DangerMouse was turned around into a zany, vegetarian vampire looking for fame and fortune. Though thankfully this iteration of a veggie vampire turned out a lot better than the more modern version. One day, Patterson, you'll be a glistening skull on my trophy shelf next to Iggy Azalea, Lee Francis, and Donald Trump. Duckula started off as a villain who was jealous of DangerMouse's success and teamed up with Greenback to take him down to gain notoriety and fame. However, while he's still after the limelight in his own show, in there he's more of a child at heart, slightly neurotic kind of character who doesn't really care much about morality. He's just out to get his own way, though thankfully he's gotten rid of his annoying voice he had in DangerMouse.
Yes. Wait.
Wait for the applause!
Applause?
Yes!
Sounds like Jamie Oliver at a Halloween party. This show was more of an outright comedy than an action comedy, which is what DangerMouse advertised itself as, and was partially a parody of the classic Hammer House of Horror Dracula series starring Christopher Lee, as established in the intro, which informs us that Duckula was just a regular vampire duck, as regular as someone with the title Vampire Duck can be. But in his last resurrection from being turned to jelly and smoke via sunlight, his nanny accidentally poured tomato ketchup into his ashes rather than blood, so now he's a vegetarian vampire looking for fame and fortune.
He won't bite, feast the man, 'cause he's a vegetarian, and things never run to plan for.
Could have gone worse though. I mean, could you imagine if she poured a Bloody Mary into there? I mean, an alcoholic vampire duck would just be... Actually, I take that back. That would be a fantastic idea. Someone make a show with that. I'd say your enjoyment of this show depends on your capacity to endure goofy and slightly annoying comic relief, since the nanny character gets on my tits every time I watch this show.
No, don't you worry about that. Nanny'll soon have you unstuck.
No, Nanny, not like that. See you. That's sore, Nanny. Oh.
Though it does make me suspicious that her name, design, and personality are almost identical to the same character from DuckTales, another awesome show about ducks with a catchy as hell theme song with a main character looking for fortune. Maybe Disney weren't looking far when they thought up of ideas for this show. If only Cosgrove would have noticed, the settlement they could have gotten out of that would have kept them off the dole for a long time. Though David Jason does do a fantastic job as the Fanged Fowl himself, with yet another vaguely Italian-American accent.
Look, I've got stuck to my model of the Titanic. The glue sorta got a bit out of hand.
We've got more Italian Americans in this show than Tony Danza hosting a Bugsy Malone reunion with a Super Mario Bros. And Godfather interval. And much like young Dracula, a lot of the great humour comes from lampooning a lot of the old vampire myths and legends, along with Duckula's ego and somewhat childish mood swings, especially in the episode Family Reunion.
Yes, I'd say, Yugoslavian?
Oh, very good, sir.
Yugoslavian, peasant girl? No, I tell a lie. Barmaid.
Well done indeed, sir.
And of course, just like DangerMouse, it's worth watching just for the awesome theme song.
In the heart of Transylvania, in the Vampire Hall of Fame, yeah, there's not a vampire in the other. If you're looking for some fun,
Call me Funkula, cause I'm heading to the vampire disco tonight.
they call
Count Duckula.
The second DangerMouse spin-off, which I'm sure that most of you probably had no idea existed until I just mentioned it now, was a comedy crime cartoon called Victor and Hugo, about two characters who originally appeared as Gaston and Pierre in Duckula. Oh, I wish. Who also took their names from the writer of Hunchback. That or that one tube station in Days of Future Past. Who are basically your typical inept criminals who, despite the fact that they never actually steal anything, manage to get away every single time. Just like in real life crime. What's unfortunate is that even though this show wasn't great and not a lot of many people have heard of it, it did actually have some of the best animation of any Cosgrove cartoon of the 80s and 90s. Even though Victor and Hugo themselves do kind of look like humanizations of DangerMouse and Penfold. It still has David Jason in it, of course, but I think I know why the show failed. Because their theme song is shit!
They are the bunglers in crime. The baddies. Victor and Hugo. Gonna succeed this time.
Seriously, I've heard better things in modern CBBC theme songs. This is more boring than listening to Jess Glynn. You know it's true! To be fair, this theme song has the same effect as the theme song from Stardust Crusaders. It's a very different style of song to the previous series theme songs, which were both great, but this one does grow on you after a while, if only because it's actually kind of smooth and melodious. Though, let's be honest, this isn't the kind of theme song that you'd repeat to yourself when just listening to it casually like DM's and Duckula's. Honestly, if you want to watch a good Cops and Robbers cartoon, watch either the old Cookie Crisp adverts from the 80s or the Cops TV show. The cartoon or the reality series, either one's over the top and bizarre. By the time the noughties ran round, however, there wasn't much place left for a secret agent mouse and a vegetarian duck. Not when we had a talking sea sponge, tiny animals in a ball, killer card games, talking beavers, and two men doing the old wooden plank act for the millionth time. And before anybody comments, yes, I love Chucklevision too. I might even do a video on it one day, but for as brilliant as it is, it does use too much of the old-fashioned slapstick routine than someone from the mid-90s should be doing. That's all I'm saying. And despite even getting some small playtime on Nickelodeon back in the day, DM and Duckula will move further and further up the time schedule from primetime on CITV at weekends and sent to the entertainment purgatory that is BBC Two, where they were mostly shown in the BBC's Find Something Not Heavily Copyrighted That We Have a Lot of Episodes in the Archive lunch block on weekdays between 11 and 1, shown with other classic shows such as The Munsters and Top Cat.
My first falling out TC. Officer Dibble, I've got AIDS.
Which, unless you're a kid pretending to be sick, a rich person with nothing to do, or the person who has to sit in the TV studio and watch the shows as it airs, which in that regard I feel really sorry for the guy who has to do that when Loose Women's on. Probably because he's even more concerned about why there's a noose hanging from his ceiling. What are we talking about again? Oh right, yeah. DangerMouse and Duckula basically faded off into obscurity, and despite still technically getting airtime, it wasn't really in an area where you could still consider them to be popular and really big stuff around about that time anyway. I know, bummer. But then again, what's that I hear? What's that I see coming over the distance of last autumn? What can it be? Well, it can only be this. Oh, that's right, ladies and gents, it's back. Yes, in 2015, after the Beeb decided that probably no one was watching their new kid shows anymore, they brought back DangerMouse in a brand new series. This was also part of the same initiative that made them bring back the Clangers and Teletubbies the same year, not to mention the CGI reboot of Thunderbirds on CITV, and supposedly even the Wombles and Super Ted soon will be thrown into the computer-generated vat as well. What do you think about that sweary clanger? Indeed. Despite that, the new series is actually fantastic. It's not your average run-of-the-mill reboot, it's actually a sequel to the original show. The first episode establishes that DangerMouse is still the world's greatest secret agent and that Baron Greenback has apparently gone straight. Hijinks ensue, of course, but while the great sense of humour has naturally been updated for modern audiences, it actually feels like a genuine follow-on from the original series, and coupled with some fantastic voice acting. For the role of the greatest secret agent himself, we have Pointless's Alexander Armstrong.
How attached are you to HQ, Penfold?
The great Stephen Fry as the Colonel.
Disaster, DM. Just received this footage from Cambodia. Not that footage.
Kevin Eldon as Penfold.
What do you mean, Chief?
And probably the greatest casting choice of all time, Come Dine With Me's Dave Lamb as the narrator and Stiletto.
Could we cut to the bit where the Baron says you're too late, DangerMouse?
They're right outside the door!
The only way this could be better casting is if they actually resurrected Marlon Brando to play the Baron. We also have a few new characters along for the ride, such as Professor Squawk-and-Cluck.
Touch anything while I'm away.
Not even this?
Not even my translation device.
Played by the lovely Shauna MacDonald, who also played Helen in Taggart and Sister Margaret in the remake of Silent Night, Deadly Night.
Garbage Day! Huh? No!
No, not that one. Also, DangerMouse's American equivalent, Jeopardy Mouse, played by Thrones actor Lena Headey.
Who are you?
Jeopardy Mouse, world's greatest secret agent.
And let's just hope that Penfold isn't stabbed in the stomach and left in the snow at the end of the next series. We don't need to make this show any more Thrones-like than it is. Although... And with her character, they naturally go through the typical stereotype of her being an overzealous, obnoxious buzzkill, though they naturally become friends in the end, and she comes back in a few episodes. For some reason, reset of all that character development because she's still an overzealot buzzkill, but whatever. Plus, we also get some great guest stars with Richard Ayoade,
Jingle bells, DangerMouse smells, Penfold is a pain.
Brian Blessed, Miranda Richardson, hell, even the voice acting legend Mark Silk voices Nero. Not to mention the phone jacker himself as Lucifer.
How dare you use that name? Release the Portaloo!
Thank you, cartoon gods, for blessing us with this amazing ensemble of thespians, and also reuniting most of the original Blackadder cast. Truth be told though, there are some moments where it feels a bit more childish than the original. Hell, one of the first episodes is called Planet of the Toilets, and no, they're not referring to Piccadilly Station because these ones actually do work, though we do get some good bits of humour, including alien plants that overgrow the planet and speak Welsh. I can't make this up, people, because if I could, I'd be writing for this show. But despite that, the humour generally employs the greatest parts of the original show, though at the cost of being able to give the character more personality in his performance. Armstrong's performance as DangerMouse isn't really as funny as Jason's, though he does bring his own flair to the role, as do all the voice actors, and the surreal, sarcastic, theatrical and pun-based humour is all still there. There are some gags that poke fun of the idea of DangerMouse existing in a very modern environment, but they get a laugh too, and the animation, while not being as fluent and smooth as the original, the speed, the sharp actions and the reactions of what happens within the scene lend itself to the various forms of humour in the show perfectly. But by far, the best part of this show's humour is the meta-humour. It's gone so overboard, it's almost like a 80s TMNT or Basil Brush show. I think my favourite joke I've seen in the new series so far is when they're using the sat-nav on DangerMouse's car, and it says, "Drive into the tree in front of you and twang to your destination." Penfold questions this, and then as they drive into the tree and it flicks them over to Bouncy Henge, don't question it, it actually has this massive twang onomatopoeia across the screen. That actually had me going, that one. Basically, I feel that this show, every episode, can have at least one joke that anybody in the world could find at least a tad funny, especially when they pull off so many different types of humour that, for the most part, they can pull off. As of now, the show has ended its first series, but there are rumours of a second, and a potential new version of Duckula too, since he's made a cameo in the last episode, and has a new voice actor confirmed for both him and the Van Helsing character from his show as well. Though I do hope that whoever does do the voice this time does a much less annoying job than Jason did when he originally did the role in DangerMouse.
Oh, carrots! Yes! But no garlic! I don't like garlic. No, I don't like garlic either. Are you allergic? No, I'm a vampire.
Seriously, if I'm just going to watch a mallard with a spitting speech impediment, I'll just watch Daffy Duck. But at the same time, I actually am curious to see what they're going to do with this version of Duckula, considering that not only has he had a redesign when all the other characters have basically stayed the same, but he's actually been classed as a villain this time, and seems to have a pair of real vampire teeth. So he's either holding on to those false gnashes and is still out to get DangerMouse's success, or he's been resurrected again and this time it's actually gone through well, so he's a real vampire. And I've just realised I spent the last couple of seconds debating about whether a duck who is a vampire is a real vampire. I am officially a massive geek. Though, to be fair, I think that was pretty obvious considering all the stuff that I've done before on this channel. Also, the animation generally feels like a natural follow-on from the original one as well, while of course not utilising the classic hand-drawn style, though to be fair no one does anymore. They've done the next best thing in using digitally rendered 2D animation, which looks great. The models are basically the same, though there is a little bit of stylization in the shapes to match the new style. The speed and the very stop-start style of the characters' movements matches perfectly with the fast and rather random and occasionally absurd humour, and goes perfectly with the show's deadpan style. In short, the BBC did a great job with bringing back this classic cartoon for the modern audience. Overall, while it is a tad sad to see a classic TV show having to get redone just so they can rope in a new audience when they could have just shown the old one, it is also great to see so much love and attention put into this classic series about a rhododendron roughhousing super agent. So, here's to hoping the future contains more super eye patches, explosions and flying cars from our rodent compatriot. DangerMouse, over and out.
He's terrific. He's magnific. He's the greatest secret agent in the world. DangerMouse, powerhouse. He's the fastest, he's the greatest, he's the best. DangerMouse, DangerMouse, DangerMouse.
If you're feeling all you kind of could be your man up with
Duckula.
If your knees go and your teeth go, maybe you bumped into
Duckula.
He flies through the night looking for a bite, but he's back home by daylight.
Duckula.
Oh, and one last thing. For some reason on the Wikipedia entry for Duckula, it says at the bottom of Duckula's character description, the character has an American accent despite being voiced by an English person. And? What's that got to do with anything? House gets away with it.